In the fog-draped shadows of 1920s London, a ballet star, Clara Vane, lies dead in her studio, a single stab wound piercing her heart, a shattered ebony mirror her silent witness. Hercule Poirot steps onto this deadly stage where ambition, obsession, and forbidden love collide. Was it the envious rival, the controlling choreographer, or the devoted admirer who wielded the blade? A burned letter, a hidden knife, and a mirror's broken truth unravel a secret worth killing for. Can Poirot unmask the killer before the final curtain falls? Chapter 1. The Shattered Reflection. The fog hung heavy over London, curling like a living thing around the narrow streets of Covent Garden, where the Étoile Ballet Company's studio nestled in a converted warehouse. It was a place of dreams, where the air thrummed with the rhythm of point shoes and the faint echo of Tchaikovsky. But this morning, it was a tomb. Hercule Poirot stepped delicately through the studio's arched doorway, his patent leather shoes clicking on the threshold, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the chaos within. His moustache, perfectly symmetrical, quivered slightly as he surveyed the scene, his grey eyes darting with the precision of a metronome. Before him lay Miss Clara Vane, principal dancer of the Étoile, her lithe form crumpled on the polished wooden floor like a marionette with severed strings. Her pale leotard was stained crimson at the chest, where a single, precise stab wound had ended her life. Around her, the remnants of a vast, ebony-framed mirror lay scattered, its shards catching the weak November light like scattered diamonds. The mirror, once the pride of the studio, now seemed a malevolent presence, its jagged edges framing the tragedy in cruel mockery. Inspector Japp, his weathered face set in a scowl, stood near the body, his notebook clutched tightly. "Morning, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff, but tinged with relief at the detective's arrival. "Got a right mess here. Found her at dawn, thanks to the charwoman. No sign of the weapon, and this blasted mirror, smashed to kingdom come. Could be a burglary gone wrong, or maybe she tripped and fell into it. But that wound—" He shook his head. "Doesn't add up." Poirot tilted his head, his gloved hand adjusting the brim of his Homburg. "A burglary, mon ami. Non, non. The thief who steals from a dancer's studio does not leave such a scene. And a fall? The wound is too clean, too deliberate." He stepped closer, his movements precise, avoiding the glass that crunched under Japp's heavier tread. "This is murder, Inspector, and the mirror. It is not a victim, but a witness." The studio was a cavern of shadows, its high windows admitting only slivers of grey light. The bar along one wall bore the scuffs of countless rehearsals, and a gramophone in the corner stood silent, its needle poised as if waiting for Clara to rise and dance again. Poirot knelt beside the body, his eyes, tracing the delicate lines of her face, frozen in an expression of surprise rather than fear. Her dark hair, usually pinned in a tight bun, had come loose, fanning across the floor like spilled ink. "Clara Vane," Poirot murmured. "A star of the ballet, oui? Her performances? They were the talk of London, were they not?" He glanced at Japp, who nodded. "Aye, she was a sensation. Packed houses every night. But you know how these theatre folk are. Jealousy, rivalries. Could be someone wanted her out of the spotlight." Poirot's gaze returned to the mirror's wreckage. A single shard, larger than the rest, lay near Clara's hand, its surface marred by a faint smear of blood and something else, a trace of grease paint, the kind dancers use to enhance their features under stage lights. He lifted it with his handkerchief, holding it to the light. "Curio," he said softly. "This grease paint, it is not from Mademoiselle Vane's face. She wears none today." Japp frowned. "You think the killer left it? But why smash the mirror at all?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The mirror, it sees all, Inspector. Perhaps it saw too much, or perhaps its destruction was meant to tell us something. A struggle, a distraction, or a symbol." He rose, dusting his knees with a fastidious flick. "We must learn who was here last night, who knew Clara's habits. A dancer does not practice alone in an empty studio without reason." Japp gestured to a constable by the door. "We've got 3 to start with. Evelyn Carter, her understudy, sharp as a tack and twice as ambitious. Leonard Marsh, the choreographer, a moody sort who ran the company like his personal kingdom. And Arthur Finch, some rich toff who followed Clara like a puppy. All had ties to her, all might have had a grudge." Poirot nodded, his mind already arranging the pieces of this puzzle. "Then we shall begin, mon ami, by studying these players in Clara's final act. But first, I must see the stage itself." He moved to the center of the studio, where the floor was worn smooth by countless pirouettes. A faint scratch on the bar caught his eye, barely visible, as if a metal object had grazed it. He filed the detail away, his brain a perfect machine of observation and deduction. As the constables cordoned off the scene, Poirot's thoughts turned to Clara Vane. Not just the dancer, but the woman. What secrets had she carried? What passions had burned behind her gracious façade? The mirror, he sensed, held the key, not in its glass, but in the reason for its ruin. With a final glance at the broken reflection, he turned to Japp. "Come, Inspector. The truth awaits us, and Hercule Poirot does not keep it waiting." Chapter 2. The rival's ambition. The fog had thickened outside the Étoile Ballet Company's studio, wrapping Covent Garden in a shroud that muffled sound and blurred the edges of the world. Inside, however, the air was sharp with tension, as if the very walls held their breath. Hercule Poirot sat in the cramped office at the back of the studio, a room barely large enough for a desk, a chair, and a sagging bookshelf stuffed with old programs and sheet music. The single bulb overhead cast a harsh light, throwing shadows that danced like spectres across the peeling wallpaper. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit and polished shoes, seemed an incongruous figure in this utilitarian space, his moustache a precise crescent above his lips, his grey eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. Across from him sat Miss Evelyn Carter, Clara Vane's understudy, and, by all accounts, her chief rival. She was a tall woman, all angles and sinew, with a face that might have been beautiful if not for the hardness in her green eyes. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, accentuating the sharp lines of her cheekbones, and her fingers, long and restless, twisted a silk scarf in her lap, a nervous habit, Poirot noted, though her expression remained defiant. She wore a simple grey dress, practical yet elegant, as if she wished to distance herself from the flamboyance of the stage while still asserting her presence. Inspector Japp stood by the door, his arms crossed, his bowler hat tilted slightly back on his head. He had insisted on being present, though Poirot sensed his impatience. Japp preferred action to the slow unravelling of motives that Poirot relished. "Miss Carter," Japp began gruffly, "you were here last night, weren't you? One of the last to see Clara Vane alive." Evelyn's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. "I was, Inspector. I left the studio at 8 o'clock, as I told your constable. Clara was still here, practicing alone. She often did that, pushing herself past exhaustion. It wasn't healthy, if you ask me." Poirot tilted his head, his hands folded neatly on the desk. "And you, mademoiselle, you did not stay to practice? You, who are the understudy, who must be ready to step into the light at any moment." Her eyes flashed, a spark of indignation. "I practice enough, Mr. Poirot. I don't need to haunt the studio at all hours to prove my worth. Clara was the star, not me. I knew my place." The words were clipped, but Poirot caught the undercurrent of resentment, like a dissonant note in a symphony. "Your place," he repeated softly, his accent lending the words a gentle cadence. "But it is a difficult place, n'est-ce pas? To stand always in the shadow of another, to wait for the moment when the star falters. Did you not dream of taking Mademoiselle Vane's role?" Evelyn's fingers stilled on the scarf, and for a moment her composure wavered. "Of course I did," she admitted, her voice low. "Every dancer dreams of the spotlight. But I didn't hate Clara for it. She was brilliant. Everyone said so. Her Odette in Swan Lake was—" She paused, searching for the word. "Transcendent. I could never match that." Poirot's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. "Transcendent, you say, yet brilliance it can inspire envy, as well as admiration. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you ever quarrel with Mademoiselle Vane? A disagreement, perhaps, over a role or a performance?" Evelyn's gaze flicked to the side, toward the bookshelf, where a photograph of Clara in mid-pirouette stood propped among the clutter. "We had our differences," she said carefully. "Clara could be demanding. She wanted every step perfect, every gesture flawless. Sometimes she pushed the rest of us too hard, especially during rehearsals for the new ballet. But that's all. I didn't wish her harm." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "And last night, when you left at 8, you saw nothing unusual. No one lingering near the studio. No sounds that gave you pause." She shook her head, her auburn hair catching the light. "Nothing. The street was quiet, the studio empty except for Clara. She was at the bar, working on her arabesque. I said good night, and she barely looked up. That was Clara, lost in her own world." Japp shifted, his boots creaking on the floor. "And you went straight home, Miss Carter. No detours, no visits to anyone who might confirm your whereabouts." Evelyn's cheeks flushed, a faint pink against her pale skin. "I live alone, Inspector, in a flat on Drury Lane. I went home, had supper, and went to bed. I'm afraid there's no one to vouch for me after I left." Her tone was defiant now, as if daring them to doubt her. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the desk, a rhythm as precise as a dancer's steps. "Mademoiselle, let us speak of the mirror. It was a magnificent piece, non? A gift to the company, I understand. Did it hold any special significance for you, or for Mademoiselle Vane?" Evelyn frowned, clearly puzzled. "The mirror? It was just there. We all used it to check our form, to perfect our lines. Clara spent hours in front of it, adjusting her posture, her arms. She said it was like dancing with her own ghost." Her voice softened, a flicker of something, grief perhaps, crossing her face. "I suppose it was fitting, in a way, that it broke when she died." "Fitting," Poirot echoed, his tone thoughtful. "Or perhaps convenient. A broken mirror. It suggests a struggle, an accident. But a stab wound, mademoiselle, that is no accident. Did you ever see Mademoiselle Vane with a knife? Perhaps one used for trimming point shoes or cutting fabric? Evelyn's eyes widened, and she leaned back slightly, as if recoiling from the question. A knife? No, never. We all have small scissors for our shoes, but nothing like what you're implying. Her voice rose, a note of panic creeping in. You think I killed her, don't you? Because I wanted her role? That's absurd. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming but firm. I think nothing yet, mademoiselle. I observe, I listen, and I arrange the little grey cells in order. But tell me, one final thing. Did Mademoiselle Vane ever speak of a letter, a message, or a secret that troubled her? For the first time, Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening on the scarf until her knuckles whitened. A letter? No, not exactly. But a few days ago, during rehearsal, she seemed distracted. She kept looking at her bag, as if expecting something. I thought it was just nerves about the new ballet. It's a demanding piece, and Mr. Marsh was relentless about it. Mr. Marsh, Poirot repeated, filing the name away. The choreographer, oui? A man of great passion for his art, I'm told. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. Passion, yes, and control. He ruled us all, especially Clara. She was his muse, but sometimes I wondered if she felt trapped by it. She caught herself, as if realizing she'd said too much, and rose abruptly. I've told you all I know, Mr. Poirot. May I go? Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. For now, mademoiselle. But we shall speak again. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, like a dancer stepping into the light. As Evelyn left, her footsteps echoing down the hall, Japp let out a low whistle. She's a cool one, Poirot. That ambition of hers, it's like a fire under the surface. You think she's hiding something. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care. She hides much, mon ami, but whether it is guilt or merely pride, I cannot yet say. Her alibi is weak, her envy palpable. Yet there is something in her manner, a fear, perhaps, or a regret, that wasn't fit the picture of a cold-blooded killer. We must dig deeper. He moved to the office window, which overlooked the studio floor. The crime scene was still cordoned off, the broken mirror a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the night. Poirot's gaze lingered on the shards, his mind turning over Evelyn's words. The mirror as a ghost, Clara's distraction, the mention of Leonard Marsh. These were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. He thought of Evelyn's nervous hands, the way her eyes had darted to the photograph of Clara. Was it guilt, or something more personal? A rivalry, yes, but perhaps also a bond, a shared life in the grueling world of ballet. Come, Japp, Poirot said at last, turning from the window. Let us return to the scene. The studio, it has more to tell us, and I suspect the mirror's fragments hold secrets we have not yet uncovered. They descended to the studio floor, where the air was colder, the silence heavier. Poirot knelt once more beside the body, now covered with a sheet by the constables. He lifted a corner, studying Clara's face. Not the expression, but the faint traces of rosin dust on her fingers, the scuff marks on her point shoes. She had been practicing, yes, but alone, late at night, in a studio where anyone familiar with her routine could find her. He turned to the mirrors. Remains, picking up another shard with his handkerchief. The grease paint smudge he had noticed earlier was still there, faint but distinct, and he frowned. Japp, he said, holding up the shard. This grease paint, it is not from Clara's face, but it is fresh. Someone touched this mirror after it was broken, or perhaps as it was breaking. A dancer, perhaps, or someone who works closely with them. Japp scratched his chin. Could be Evelyn. She'd know her way around the studio, know Clara's habits. Easy enough to slip back in after everyone left. Possible, Poirot conceded, but we must not leap to conclusions. The grease paint, it is a clue. But to what? A disguise? A mistake? Or something more deliberate? He set the shard down carefully, his mind racing. Evelyn's ambition was clear, but ambition alone didn't a murderer make. There was something else, something in her hesitation when he mentioned the letter that suggested she knew more than she had revealed. As they left the studio, the fog outside seemed to press closer, as if conspiring to hide the truth. Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of possibilities. Evelyn's envy, Marsh's control, the mysterious letter. The stage was set, the players assembled, and Hercule Poirot knew that the next act would bring him closer to the heart of this deadly dance. For now he would watch, listen, and let the little grey cells do their work, certain that the truth, like a dancer's final bow, would soon take centre stage. Chapter 3. The choreographer's command, the fog had not lifted from Covent Garden, and as Hercule Poirot made his way through the narrow streets to the Étoile Ballet Company's rehearsal hall, he felt the damp chill seep through his overcoat. His mind, however, was alight with the clarity of purpose, piecing together the fragments of the tragedy that had unfolded in the studio. The death of Clara Vane was no mere accident. It was a performance staged with care, and the choreographer, Leonard Marsh, was the next figure to step into Poirot's spotlight. The rehearsal hall, a cavernous space adjacent to the main studio, was alive with the clatter of point shoes and the barked commands of an assistant director. Dancers moved in precise formation, their reflections flickering in a smaller, unblemished mirror along one wall. Poirot paused at the threshold, his small fastidious figure drawing curious glances from the corps de ballet. He adjusted his Homburg hat, his moustache twitching as he surveyed the scene. The air was thick with the scent of rosin and liniment, a reminder of the physical toll of this art. Leonard Marsh stood at the centre of the hall, a tall man in his late 40s, his dark hair streaked with silver, and his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to command the very air around him. He wore a black turtleneck and trousers, his movements sharp and authoritative as he corrected a dancer's posture with a single gesture. No, Elise, the arm must extend, not collapse, like Clara, always like Clara. His voice, rich and resonant, carried a note of grief that did not escape Poirot's notice. Inspector Japp, trailing behind Poirot, cleared his throat. "Mr. Marsh, a word, if you please. This is Hercule Poirot, here to assist with the investigation into Miss Vane's death." Marsh turned, his gaze appraising as it settled on Poirot. "The detective," he said, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "I've heard of you, Mr. Poirot. A man who sees what others miss, they say. I hope you can make sense of this madness." He gestured to a corner of the hall, where a small table held a carafe of water and a stack of choreography notes. "Shall we?" Poirot inclined his head, his grey eyes never leaving Marsh's face as they moved to the table. The choreographer's hands, he noted, were strong and calloused, the hands of a man who had once danced but now shaped others' movements. A small cut, barely healed, marked the back of his right hand, its edges pink against his pale skin. Poirot filed this detail away, his mind already turning over its significance. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot began, his voice soft but incisive. You were, I understand, the architect of Mademoiselle Vane's brilliance. Her muse, perhaps, as well as her mentor. Tell me, what was she to you? Marsh's jaw tightened, and for a moment his eyes flickered with something. Sorrow, or perhaps guilt. Clara was extraordinary, he said, his voice low. A dancer who could make an audience forget the world. Every step, every gesture was perfection. I created the new ballet, L'Ombre Éternelle, for her. She was its heart. He paused, his fingers brushing the cut on his hand, a gesture so quick it might have gone unnoticed by a less observant eye. Poirot's smile was polite but probing. And yet, perfection, it can be demanding, no? A muse is not always content to be moulded. Did Mademoiselle Vane ever resist your vision? Marsh's eyes narrowed, but he answered smoothly. Clara had spirit, yes. She challenged me, as all great artists do. We argued sometimes about a step, a tempo, the emotion of a scene. But it was always for the sake of the art. I respected her fire. Respected? Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. But respect, it does not always prevent conflict. I am told you argued with Mademoiselle Vane last week, perhaps about this new ballet. What was the nature of this disagreement? Marsh hesitated, his fingers tightening around a pencil on the table. It was nothing serious, he said at last. Clara wanted to alter a sequence in the second act. She thought it too rigid, too cold. I disagreed. The ballet is about sacrifice, not sentiment. We compromised, as we always did. Poirot's moustache twitched. Compromise, monsieur, is a delicate dance. But let us speak of last night. Where were you when Mademoiselle Vane met her? Tragic end? Marsh leaned back, his posture relaxed but his eyes wary. I was at home, in my flat on Bloomsbury Square. I spent the evening working on the score for L'Ombre Éternelle. My housekeeper, Mrs. Ridley, can confirm I was there until she retired at 9. And after 9, Poirot pressed, his voice gentle but relentless. You were alone, perhaps, with your thoughts. And your work. Marsh's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, alone. I often work late. The creative mind does not keep regular hours, Mr. Poirot. Japp, who had been silent, interjected. Your housekeeper's word only goes so far, Mr. Marsh. That flat of yours is a short walk from here. You could have slipped out, come to the studio, and been back before anyone noticed. Marsh's face darkened, but his voice remained steady. I had no reason to harm Clara. She was the soul of my work. Without her, the ballet is diminished. Poirot's gaze lingered on the cut on Marsh's hand. A small injury, monsieur, he said, gesturing to it. How did you come by it? Marsh glanced at his hand, as if seeing the cut for the first time. A trivial thing, he said quickly. I was handling some props yesterday. Old frames, bits of scenery. A splinter, nothing more. A splinter, Poirot echoed, his tone neutral. Curious, is it not, that such a wound should appear so fresh on the morning of a murder involving a shattered mirror? Glass, it can be treacherous, non? Marsh's eyes flashed, but he said nothing, his silence as telling as any words. Poirot shifted tack, his voice softening. Monsieur, let us speak of the mirror itself. It was your gift to the company, I understand. A magnificent piece, ebony and grand. Why was it so important? Marsh's expression softened, a flicker of pride breaking through his reserve. It was a symbol, he said. A reminder to the dancers that they must face themselves, their flaws, their strengths, before they can face an audience. Clara loved it. She said it made her feel seen. Seen, Poirot murmured, his mind turning over the word. And perhaps it saw too much, this mirror. Tell me, did Mademoiselle Vane ever speak of a letter, a message that troubled her? Something that might have drawn her to the studio alone last night? Marsh's fingers stilled on the pencil, and for a moment his composure faltered. A letter? No, she never mentioned anything like that. Clara was private, even with me. If she was troubled, she kept it to herself. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Marsh's face. The choreographer's control was admirable, but there were cracks, small, almost invisible. But there, the cut on his hand, the hesitation in his voice, the mention of Clara's privacy. These were not the marks of an innocent man, but neither were they proof of guilt. Poirot's little grey cells were busy, arranging the pieces of this puzzle with meticulous care. Japp, sensing the interview's end, stepped forward. "That'll be all for now, Mr. Marsh, but don't leave town. We'll need to speak again." Marsh rose, his movements fluid despite the tension in his frame. "I have a ballet to finish, Inspector. I'll be here, doing what I do best." He glanced at Poirot, a challenge in his eyes. "Find who did this, Mr. Poirot, for Clara's sake." As Marsh returned to the dancers, his voice resuming its commanding tone, Poirot and Japp stepped out into the fog. The rehearsal hall's echoes faded behind them, replaced by the muffled sounds of the street. Japp lit a cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke into the mist. "He's a slippery one, Poirot. That cut on his hand could be from the mirror, couldn't it? And his alibi's as thin as paper after 9. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The cut, it is suggestive, mon ami, but not conclusive. A man like Marsh, he lives for control, over his dancers, his art, perhaps even his emotions. But control, when threatened, can lead to desperate acts. We must verify his movements, and we must learn more of this letter that seems to haunt our inquiries." They walked back toward the studio, where the crime scene awaited further scrutiny. Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of images. Marsh's commanding presence, the cut on his hand, the mirror's shattered remains. The choreographer was a man of passion, but passion could be a double-edged sword. Had Clara's defiance, her wish to alter his vision, pushed him to a fatal act? Or was there another secret hidden in the shadows of their relationship that had led to her death? As they reached the studio door, Poirot paused, his gaze distant. "The mirror, Japp," he said softly. "It is the key. Not just to what it saw, but to why it was destroyed. Monsieur Marsh knows more than he says, and we shall uncover it, step by careful step." Chapter 4. The Devoted Admirer. The fog of Covent Garden had begun to thin, revealing the cobblestones and gaslights of the bustling district. But within the confines of the Étoile Ballet Company's orbit, a different kind of haze lingered, one of suspicion and unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the damp, made his way to a small café on Floral Street, a discreet establishment frequented by theatre folk. The air inside was warm, redolent with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked scones, and the low hum of conversation provided a cocoon of normalcy against the grim task at hand. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly on the tiled floor as he approached a corner table where Mr. Arthur Finch, the third suspect in Clara Vane's murder, sat waiting. Finch was a man in his early 50s, round-faced and balding, with a softness to his features that suggested a life of comfort rather than toil. His tweed suit was well tailored, his tie a muted shade of burgundy, and his hands, folded nervously on the table, bore the faint ink stains of a man who wrote frequently. Perhaps letters, Poirot mused. A programme from Clara's last performance, Giselle, lay before him, its edges worn from repeated handling. Finch's eyes, red-rimmed and anxious, lifted as Poirot approached, and he rose clumsily, knocking over a teaspoon. "Mr. Poirot," he stammered, I'm so grateful you've come. This is a dreadful business. Simply dreadful. Clara, she was an angel." His voice trembled, and he clutched the programme as if it were a talisman. Poirot inclined his head, his moustache curving slightly in a gesture of sympathy. "Monsieur Finch, my condolences for your loss. Please sit. We have much to discuss, and Hercule Poirot seeks only the truth." He settled into the chair opposite, his small frame exuding an authority that belied his stature. Inspector Japp, who had followed at a discreet distance, took a seat at a nearby table, pretending to study a newspaper, but clearly listening. Finch sank back into his chair, his hands still gripping the programme. "I don't know what I can tell you, Mr. Poirot. I wasn't at the studio last night. I was at the Lyceum, watching a production of La Bohème. Dozens of people saw me there. Ask anyone in the stalls." Poirot's grey eyes, sharp as polished steel, studied Finch's face. "A most convenient alibi, monsieur. The Lyceum is not far from Covent Garden, no? A man might leave a theatre, slip away for a time, and return unnoticed. But let us begin at the beginning. You were, I understand, a great admirer of Mademoiselle Vane." Finch's cheeks flushed, and he nodded vigorously. "Oh, yes. She was extraordinary. Her grace, her passion. It was as if she danced with her soul. I've been a patron of the Étoile for years, but Clara, she was different. I sent her flowers after every performance, wrote her letters to express my admiration. She was kind enough to reply, sometimes." His voice softened, a wistful note creeping in. "She had such a generous heart." Poirot's fingers steepled, a gesture as familiar as his meticulous attire. "Generous, oui, but perhaps not always receptive to such devotion. Did Mademoiselle Vane ever find your attentions overwhelming?" Finch's eyes widened, and he shook his head with almost childlike earnestness. "Never. She was always gracious. I knew my place, Mr. Poirot. I'm no fool. I'm a widower, a man of means, but no match for her youth or brilliance. I only wanted to support her, to see her shine." He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the Giselle programme. "She wrote me a note once, thanking me for a bouquet of lilies. I keep it in my desk at home." Poirot's smile was gentle, but probing. "A note, you say? And did you ever send her letters of a more personal nature? Letters that might have caused her distress, perhaps?" Finch's face paled, and his hands trembled slightly. "Distress? No, never. My letters were respectful, always. I wrote of her performances, her artistry. If she was distressed, it wasn't because of me." His voice cracked, and he looked down at the table, as if the weight of his words pressed upon him. Japp, unable to resist, leaned forward from his table. "Come now, Mr. Finch. A man doesn't send flowers and letters for years without hoping for something more. Did she ever rebuff you? Tell you to back off?" Finch's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with indignation. "Rebuff me? No, Inspector, she did not. Clara was kind, but distant, as a star should be. I respected that distance. I wasn't some lovesick boy pestering her. I was her patron, her supporter." His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby patrons, and he quickly lowered it, embarrassed. I swear, I'd never harm her. She was everything. Poirot's gaze remained steady, unyielding. Monsieur, let us speak of last night. You say you were at the Lyceum. But theatres, they are dark, crowded places. A man might leave during an interval, or even before the curtain falls. Tell me, what time did you arrive? And when did you leave? Finch swallowed, his fingers tightening on the programme. I arrived just before 7 for the start of the performance. I stayed through the entire opera. It ended around 10, I think. Then I went straight home to my flat in Mayfair. My valet, Perkins, can confirm I was there by 11. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. And during the performance, did you speak with anyone? Perhaps someone who can verify your presence throughout? Finch hesitated, his brow furrowing. I spoke to a few acquaintances in the foyer before the show. Lord and Lady Harrowby were there, and Mr. Grayson, a colleague from the bank. During the interval, I stayed in my box, but I waved to Mrs. Langley across the theatre. She'll remember. Japp scribbled in his notebook, his expression sceptical. We'll check that, Mr. Finch. But it's a bit convenient, isn't it? A man like you, so devoted to Miss Vane, might know her habits, know she practiced late, alone. Finch's face crumpled, and he shook his head vehemently. I didn't know her habits, not like that. I saw her on stage, not in the studio. I'm no dancer, Inspector. I wouldn't even know how to get into that place after hours. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the slight tremor in Finch's voice. And yet, monsieur, devotion can lead one to learn such things. Did you ever visit the studio, perhaps to deliver your flowers in person? Finch's cheeks reddened again, and he looked away. Once or twice, yes. I brought flowers to the stage door after performances, but I never went inside the studio itself. Clara preferred to keep her rehearsals private. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And the mirror, monsieur. The great ebony mirror in the studio. Did you ever see it, or hear Mademoiselle Vane speak of it? Finch blinked, clearly caught off guard. The mirror? No, I don't recall her mentioning it. I saw it once, through the stage door when I dropped off some roses. It was striking, but I didn't think much of it. Why do you ask? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Because, monsieur, the mirror is a witness to this crime, and its destruction is a puzzle. A man who loves as you do might notice such a detail, even in passing. Tell me, did Mademoiselle Vane ever speak of a letter, a message that troubled her? Finch's hands stilled, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. A letter? No, she never mentioned anything like that to me. But, he hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A few weeks ago, after a performance, she seemed distracted. I gave her a bouquet, and she thanked me, but her eyes kept darting to the crowd, as if looking for someone. I thought perhaps she was tired, but now, I don't know. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Merci, Monsieur Finch. You have been most helpful. We shall verify your movements, and we may speak again. For now, I ask only that you remain in London. Finch nodded, his face a mask of anguish. I'll do anything to help find her killer, Mr. Poirot. Anything. He clutched the programme tighter, as if it could anchor him against the tide of his grief. As Poirot and Japp left the café, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing the silhouettes of passing carriages. Japp lit another cigarette, his brow furrowed. He's a bit too perfect, isn't he? All that devotion, those tears. It's almost theatrical. And his alibi's solid, but not airtight. A man could slip out of a theatre and back in 10 minutes. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his scarf. Oui, mon ami. But devotion such as his, it is a complex thing. Is it love or obsession? And that moment of hesitation when I mentioned the letter, there is something he knows, or suspects, that he does not yet say. We must check his alibi, and we must learn what drew Clara's eyes to the crowd that night. They turned toward the police station, where Japp's men would begin verifying Finch's story. Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of impressions. Finch's trembling hands, his fervent admiration, the worn program that seemed an extension of his being. The man was sincere, but sincerity could mask darker impulses. Had his love for Clara turned to desperation, or was he merely a bystander in this deadly drama? The mirror, Poirot thought, held the answer, not in its glass, but in the reason for its ruin. With each step, he felt the puzzle tightening, the threads of motive and opportunity weaving together, and he knew the next act would bring him closer to the truth. Chapter 5. The Studio's Secrets. The Étoile Ballet Company's studio, shrouded in the lingering fog of Covent Garden, stood silent under the grey afternoon light, its high windows casting long, sombre shadows across the wooden floor. Hercule Poirot, his small figure as precise as a metronome, stepped carefully through the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene where Clara Vane had met her tragic end. The air was heavy with the faint scent of rosin and the metallic tang of dried blood, a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the night. Inspector Japp followed, his boots heavy on the polished boards, his notebook open as he muttered about the need for tangible evidence. The body of Clara Vane had been removed, but the chalk outline remained, a ghostly silhouette against the scuffed floor. The ebony-framed mirror, its surface now a jagged mosaic of shards, loomed against the wall, its broken edges glinting like the facets of a dark jewel. Poirot paused, his gloved hand adjusting the brim of his Homburg, his grey eyes darting from the chalk outline to the mirror's wreckage. "This place," he murmured, "it is a stage, non? And every stage holds secrets, if one knows where to look." Japp, ever practical, gestured to the mirror. "We've combed the place, Poirot. No weapon, no fingerprints worth noting, just glass everywhere. Whoever did this was careful. Too careful, if you ask me. But that mirror, why smash it? To make it look like a struggle?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "Perhaps, mon ami, but a struggle leaves chaos, and this scene is curated. The mirror was not broken in a frenzy. It was struck with purpose." He knelt beside the chalk outline, his movements deliberate, and picked up a shard of glass with his handkerchief. The fragment, no larger than a playing card, bore a faint smudge. Not blood, but the same grease paint he had noted before, its waxy texture unmistakable under the light. "This grease paint," he said, holding it up. "It is a clue, Inspector." Not Clara's, for her face was bare. Someone else left this mark, someone who touched the mirror after it broke, or as it broke. Japp frowned, peering at the shard. Grease paint? Could be from any dancer here. They all use it for performances. Or maybe it's from a costume, a prop. Poirot shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "No, it is too specific, too fresh. A dancer in rehearsal does not wear grease paint, and a prop would not leave such a mark on glass. This was left by the killer, perhaps in haste, perhaps by design. He set the shard down and rose, his gaze sweeping the room. The bar along the wall, scuffed from years of use, drew his attention. He stepped closer, his fingers tracing a faint scratch near the mirror's base, a shallow gouge, barely visible, as if a metal object had grazed the wood. "Regardez, Jap," Poirot said, pointing to the mark. "This scratch, it is recent. A blade, perhaps, catching the bar as it was wielded or hidden. The weapon, it was small, precise. A letter opener, a knife for trimming point shoes, something a dancer might carry." Jap's eyes lit up. "You think the weapon's still here? Hidden somewhere? In the studio?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "It is possible, mon ami. A killer who stages a scene so carefully does not walk away with a bloody blade in hand. Let us search, but with method, not haste." They began a meticulous examination of the studio, Poirot's movements as precise as a dancer's pas de deux. He inspected the bar, running his fingers along its length, but found no further marks. The gramophone in the corner, its needle still poised, yielded nothing but a faint layer of dust. The pile of rosin bags near the door, used by dancers to grip their shoes, was undisturbed, but Poirot lingered over them, noting their worn fabric and the faint scent of pine. "Clara was here alone," he murmured, "practicing late. Someone knew her habits, someone she trusted enough to let close." Jap, meanwhile, poked through a small cabinet near the mirror, filled with spare leotards and rolls of dancer's tape. "Nothing here but odds and ends," he grumbled. "If there's a weapon, it's well hidden." Poirot's gaze returned to the mirror's frame, its ebony surface unmarred except for a single splinter near the base. He knelt again, his eyes narrowing, as he noticed a faint irregularity in the floorboard beneath. With a gentle press, he felt the board shift slightly, revealing a narrow gap. "Jap," he called softly, "bring a light." Jap produced a torch, its beam illuminating the crevice. Poirot inserted his handkerchief-wrapped fingers and extracted a small object, a hairpin, its tip bent and faintly discolored, as if it had been used to pry or scrape something. "Curieux," Poirot said, holding it to the light. "This is not a dancer's hairpin, not for securing a bun. It is too short, too sturdy. Perhaps it was used to conceal something, or to mark a hiding place." Jap's brow furrowed. "A hairpin? That's no weapon, Poirot. You think it's connected?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Everything is connected, mon ami. This hairpin, it is out of place, like the grease paint. It tells us the killer was careful, but not infallible. We must consider what it might have held. A note, a key, or perhaps the blade itself before it was moved." They continued their search, moving to the small alcove where dancers stored their bags. Poirot opened one, its canvas worn and stained with rosin, and found only the usual items: point shoes, a water bottle, a small sewing kit. But in the corner of the alcove, tucked behind a folded screen, he noticed a faint smudge on the wall, a smear of grease paint, identical to that on the mirror shard. "Voila," he said, pointing. "Another trace. The killer moved through this space, perhaps in haste, and left their mark." Jap scratched his chin. "So the killer was here, touched the mirror, maybe hid something. But why break it? To cover their tracks." Poirot's smile was faint. "The mirror, it is more than a prop, Jap. It is a witness, as I have said. Perhaps it reflected something the killer did not wish seen. A face, a movement, a secret. Or perhaps its destruction was symbolic, a gesture of rage or despair. He paused, his mind racing. We must speak to the seamstress, Madame Holt. She knows the studio's secrets, its comings and goings, and we must learn more of this letter that seems to haunt our suspects. As they prepared to leave, Poirot took one last look at the studio. The chalk outline, the shattered mirror, the faint scratch on the bar. They were pieces of a puzzle, each telling a part of Clara's story. He thought of Evelyn Carter's ambition, Leonard Marsh's control, Arthur Finch's devotion. Each had a motive, each had opportunity, but the truth lay in the details, the grease paint, the hairpin, the mirror's silent testimony. The stage is set, he murmured to Jap, and the next act will reveal more. Let us go, mon ami, and uncover what secrets this company holds. They stepped into the fog, the studio's silence following them like a shadow. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, weaving the threads of evidence into a pattern that was not yet clear, but growing sharper with each discovery. The truth, he knew, was close, hidden in the interplay of light and shadow, waiting for Hercule Poirot to bring it into the spotlight. Chapter 6. Whispers of Scandal. The fog of Covent Garden had retreated to a faint mist by late afternoon, leaving the streets of London glistening under a weak sun. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat immaculate despite the damp, navigated the narrow alleyways leading to the Étoile Ballet Company's costume workshop, a cramped room tucked behind the main rehearsal hall. The air within was warm, heavy with the scent of fabric dye and lavender sachets, and the rhythmic hum of a sewing machine filled the space. Poirot's polished shoes tapped lightly on the stone floor as he entered, his grey eyes scanning the cluttered shelves lined with bolts of tulle, silk ribbons, and spools of thread. Mrs. Agnes Holt, the company's seamstress, sat at a long table, her needle flashing under the glow of a single lamp. She was a woman of middle years, her face aligned with the quiet wisdom of one who observed more than she spoke. Her grey hair was pinned neatly, and her eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles, flicked up as Poirot approached. She set her needle down, smoothing the fabric of a half-finished costume, a delicate tutu in midnight blue. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and steady. "I've been expecting you. The police have been in and out all day. But you're not like them, are you? You see things they miss." Poirot's moustache curved in a modest smile. "You are kind, Madame Holt. Hercule Poirot seeks only the truth, and I believe you, with your keen eyes, may help me find it. You knew Mademoiselle Vane well, non?" Mrs. Holt nodded, her hands folding in her lap. "As well as anyone could know Clara. She was a bright star, but not one for confidences. Always polite, mind you, but guarded. I mended her costumes, adjusted her shoes. She trusted me with her craft, if not her heart." Poirot settled into a chair across from her, his posture precise, his hands steepled. "And yet, madame, those who work behind the scenes, they see much that others do not. Tell me, what did you see of Clara in the days before her death? Was she troubled, distracted, perhaps afraid?" Mrs. Holt's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing her words. "Troubled, yes," she said at last. "The last week or so, Clara wasn't herself. During fittings, she'd stare off, as if her mind was elsewhere. Once I caught her burning a letter in the dressing room, tucked it into a candle flame, and watched it curl to ash. Her hands were shaking, Monsieur Poirot, and Clara wasn't one to shake. Poirot's gaze sharpened, though his voice remained soft. A letter, you say? Did you see its contents, or perhaps who sent it? She shook her head, her fingers brushing the tutu as if seeking comfort in the familiar. No, I didn't pry. It was on fine paper, though, with a red wax seal. Unusual these days. Clara didn't say a word about it, but she looked frightened, like she'd seen a ghost. I asked if she was all right, but she just smiled and said it was nothing. Clara's smiles, they could hide a world of pain. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. This letter, madame, it is most significant. Did she receive others? Or was this the only one? Mrs. Holt frowned, her memory sifting through details. I only saw the one, but she was jumpy after that. Kept her bag close, checked it often, and she was spending more time alone in the studio, practicing late, even when Mr. Marsh told her to rest. It wasn't like her to disobey him. Mr. Marsh, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. The choreographer, he was close to Clara, oui? A man of great influence over her career. Mrs. Holt's lips pursed, a flicker of disapproval crossing her face. Too close, if you ask me. Leonard Marsh is a genius, no doubt. But he's a hard man. Demanded everything from Clara. Her time, her energy, her soul. They argued last week in the rehearsal hall. I overheard them through the wall. Something about the new ballet, L'Ombre Éternelle. Clara wanted to change a pas de deux, said it felt wrong. Mr. Marsh wouldn't hear of it. Raised his voice, he did, and Clara stormed out. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. An argument and a letter. And did you notice, madame, anything unusual about Mr. Marsh himself? His habits, perhaps, or his demeanour? She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the fabric. He's been distracted lately, always checking his watch, slipping out during breaks. Once I saw him in the alley behind the studio, speaking to someone in a cloak. Couldn't see who. It was late after most of the dancers had gone. I thought it odd, but Mr. Marsh is a private man. I didn't question it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A cloaked figure, you say. Most intriguing. And tell me, Madame Holt, the mirror in the studio, the great ebony mirror, did it hold any significance for Clara, or for the company? Mrs. Holt's expression softened, a trace of nostalgia in her eyes. That mirror was Mr. Marsh's pride. He had it brought from Paris, said it was to inspire us all, to make us face our truths. Clara spent hours before it, perfecting her lines. She'd talk to her reflection sometimes, soft-like, as if it could answer back. After it broke, I heard one of the girls say it was cursed. But that's just dancers' talk. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. And the night of Clara's death, madame, did you see or hear anything unusual in the studio? She shook her head, her face clouding. I left at 7, Monsieur Poirot. The studio was quiet, except for Clara's music on the gramophone. I passed Evelyn Carter on my way out. She was leaving too, said she was done for the night. Mr. Marsh had gone hours earlier, and I didn't see Mr. Finch. But she paused, her brow furrowing. There was a sound just as I reached the street, a clatter, like something falling. I thought it was just the wind, but now I'm not so sure. Poirot's smile was gentle, but probing. A clatter, you say? Most helpful, madame. One final question. Did Clara ever speak of a secret, something she wished to keep hidden? Mrs. Holt's eyes met his, and for a moment they held a weight of unspoken knowledge. Not in words, Monsieur Poirot, but in her eyes. She was carrying something heavy, something she couldn't share. I think that letter was part of it, but I'll never know for sure. Poirot rose, his movements precise. Merci, Madame Holt. You have given me much to consider. The truth, it is like a costume, layered, stitched with care. But it can be unpicked by those who know where to look. As he and Japp stepped back into the mist, the seamstress's words echoed in Poirot's mind. The letter, the argument, Marsh's secretive meetings, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit. Japp, lighting a cigarette, broke the silence. That letter's the key, isn't it? If we could find it, or what was left of it, we'd have something solid. Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the fog-shrouded street. The letter is ash, mon ami, but its shadow remains. Clara burned it, but its contents drove her to the studio that night. And this clatter Madame Holt heard. It suggests the mirror's fall was no accident, but part of the killer's design. We must learn more of Monsieur Marsh's movements, and this cloaked figure he met. There is a secret here, Japp, and it is one worth killing for. They turned toward the police station, where Japp's men would begin tracing Marsh's alibi and the mysterious figure in the alley. Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of images. The burned letter, Clara's frightened eyes, the grease paint smudge on the mirror. Mrs. Holt had seen much, but not enough to name the killer. Yet her words had tightened the net around their suspects, and Poirot felt the truth drawing closer, like a dancer stepping into the light. Chapter 7. The alibi's cracks. The late afternoon light filtered weakly through the fog, casting a pall over Covent Garden as Hercule Poirot and Inspector Japp made their way to the police station, a squat brick building nestled among the theatres and market stalls. The air was sharp with the scent of coal smoke and wet stone, and Poirot, his overcoat buttoned tightly, walked with a brisk precision that belied the weight of the mystery pressing upon his mind. Inside the station, the clamour of typewriters and the low murmur of constables filled the air. But Poirot's focus was singular, his grey eyes alight with the quiet intensity of a man assembling a puzzle whose pieces were scattered, but growing clearer. They settled in a small interview room, its walls stained with years of tobacco and urgency. Japp spread a file across the table, its pages detailing the initial reports on Clara Vane's murder. "We've got something, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff, but tinged with excitement. "My men checked on Finch's alibi at the Lyceum. Lord Harrowby and Mrs. Langley confirm he was there for La Bohème. But here's the rub. He left his box during the interval around 8:30 and wasn't seen again until the final act, close to 10. Plenty of time to slip over to the studio and back." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Most interesting, mon ami. Monsieur Finch, with his devotion so ardent, has a gap in his evening. And what of Monsieur Marsh's housekeeper? Does she confirm his presence at home?" Japp flipped a page, his brow furrowing. "Mrs. Ridley says Marsh was in his flat until she went to bed at 9, just as he claimed. But after that, nothing. He could have gone anywhere. No witnesses, no corroboration. And that cut on his hand. It's nagging at me, Poirot. Glass, splinter, whatever he says, it's too convenient." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled as he leaned back in the creaking chair. "The alibis. They are like a dancer's costume, Japp. Well fitted at first glance, but they unravel under scrutiny. Mademoiselle Carter, too, has no one to vouch for her after 8. 3 suspects, 3 gaps in time, and a mirror that speaks without words. Let us return to the studio, for there is more to learn from its silence." They retraced their steps through the fog, the streets now bustling with evening theatre-goers, their laughter a stark contrast to the grim task at hand. The Étoile studio was locked, but a constable let them in, the door creaking as it opened to reveal the darkened interior. The chalk outline of Clara's body remained, a stark reminder of the violence, and the shattered ebony mirror loomed like a broken promise. Poirot lit a small lantern, its soft glow illuminating the shards that littered the floor. "Regardez, Jap," Poirot said, kneeling beside the mirror's frame. "The pattern of the break. It is not random. The cracks radiate from a single point here." He pointed to a spot near the center, where the glass was most densely fractured. A heavy blow, deliberate, not the result of a fall or struggle. The killer struck the mirror after Clara was dead, to create a scene. Perhaps to mislead us. Jap crouched beside him, his torch sweeping the floor. "So you're saying the mirror wasn't part of the murder itself? Just a cover-up?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the lantern's light. "Exactement. The stab wound, it was precise, the work of one who knew where to strike. The mirror's destruction, it is theatrical, a distraction or a message. But what does it hide?" He moved to the bar, his fingers tracing the faint scratch they had found earlier. "This mark, it is no accident. A blade, perhaps, caught here as the killer moved. Or," he paused, his gaze sharpening, "perhaps it was left to draw our attention, to make us think the weapon was hidden nearby." Jap's eyes narrowed. "You think the killer's playing games with us, leaving clues to throw us off?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A clever killer, mon ami, is like a choreographer, arranging every step. But even the cleverest leaves a misstep. This scratch, the grease paint, the hairpin we found. They are not mistakes, but signatures. We must look closer." They searched the studio again, their movements methodical. Poirot examined the floorboards near the bar, pressing gently with his foot. One board, slightly loose, gave a faint creak. He knelt, prying it up with a small tool from his pocket, revealing a shallow space beneath. Inside was a scrap of paper, its edges charred, as if it had been partially burned. Poirot lifted it with his handkerchief, holding it to the light. The fragment bore a single line in elegant script. "Meet me at midnight, or all will be revealed." Jap let out a low whistle. "That's it, Poirot. The letter Mrs. Holt saw Clara burn. But who wrote it, and what was Clara hiding?" Poirot's fingers traced the paper's edge, his mind racing. "This is no ordinary note, Jap. The handwriting, it is refined, the paper fine, as Madame Holt described. A threat, perhaps, or a demand. Clara burned it, but kept this fragment. Why? To confront her killer, or to protect someone?" He slipped the paper into an envelope, handing it to Jap. "Have your men analyze this. The ink, the paper. They may tell us more." As they continued their search, Poirot's thoughts turned to the suspects. Evelyn Carter's ambition left her vulnerable, her alibi weak. Leonard Marsh's control and secretive meetings hinted at deeper motives. Arthur Finch's devotion, with its gap at the theatre, suggested opportunity. But the letter, or what remained of it, was a new thread, one that tied Clara's fear to her final moments. "This note," Poirot murmured. "It drew her to the studio alone, at night. Someone knew she would come. Someone she trusted, or feared." Jap, growing restless, paced the room. "We need to press Marsh harder, Poirot. That cut on his hand, his flimsy alibi. He's the one who knew Clara best, who could get close without suspicion. And that cloaked figure Mrs. Holt saw could be his accomplice." Poirot's gaze lingered on the mirror's shards. Perhaps, mon ami. But we must not rush. The mirror, it was struck to hide something. A reflection, a truth. And this letter, it speaks of a secret worth killing for. We must learn who stood to lose if Clara spoke. As they left the studio, the fog had thickened again, cloaking the streets in mystery. Poirot's mind was a whirl of images. The charred letter, Marsh's cut hand, Finch's trembling devotion, Evelyn's guarded eyes. The alibis were cracking, the secrets surfacing, and Poirot felt the puzzle tightening. "The truth, Jap," he said softly, "is like a dancer's shadow. It moves with the light, but it cannot hide forever. We are close, mon ami. Very close." Chapter 8. The Hidden Blade. The fog over Covent Garden had settled into a persistent veil, muting the clamour of the evening crowds as Hercule Poirot and Inspector Japp returned to the Étoile Ballet Company's studio. The air was sharp with the chill of approaching night, and the street lamps cast a feeble glow, their light barely penetrating the mist. Inside the studio, the silence was profound, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards under Poirot's meticulous steps. The chalk outline of Clara Vane's body remained, a stark reminder of the tragedy, and the shattered ebony mirror loomed against the wall, its jagged remnants like a fractured window into the past. Poirot's grey eyes, keen as a falcon's, swept the room, his mind a whirl of details, the grease paint smudge, the charred letter fragment, the faint scratch on the bar. The discovery of the partial note, "Meet me at midnight or all will be revealed," had sharpened his focus, suggesting a secret so potent it had drawn Clara to her doom. But the weapon, the small, precise blade that had ended her life, remained elusive, and Poirot knew its discovery would be a pivotal step toward unmasking the killer. "Jap," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding, "we have searched the studio, but not with the eyes of the killer. A murderer who stages such a scene does not leave the weapon in plain sight. It is hidden, yes, but close, where it can be retrieved or overlooked as part of the dance." Jap, his bowler hat tilted back, rubbed his chin. "You're thinking it's still here, Poirot? We've turned this place upside down. Floorboards, cabinets, even the blooming gramophone. Nothing but that hairpin and a bit of paper." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his confidence. "The hairpin, mon ami. It was a clue, not a trifle. It suggests a hiding place. Something small, something precise. Let us search again, but with purpose. The props room, I think. It is where dancers keep their tools, their secrets." They moved to the small alcove at the back of the studio, a cluttered space filled with racks of costumes, boxes of rosin, and shelves of miscellaneous items, ribbons, sewing kits, and worn point shoes. The props room, used for storing the company's theatrical accoutrements, was a labyrinth of shadows, its air thick with the scent of old fabric and varnish. Poirot lit a lantern, its warm glow illuminating the chaos, and began a methodical inspection, his gloved hands deftly probing the shelves. Jap, less patient, rummaged through a box of old programs, their pages yellowed and curling. "This is a needle in a haystack, Poirot. If the killer hid the weapon here, they'd have made sure it was impossible to find." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he lifted a folded costume, revealing a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of tulle. "Impossible, no. The clever killer hides in plain sight, Jap, where the ordinary becomes invisible." He opened the box, finding only a collection of dancers' tape, strips of adhesive used to secure point shoes. But as he lifted the tape, his fingers brushed something cold and metallic beneath. With a delicate touch, he extracted a slender knife, its blade no longer than a letter opener, its handle wrapped in the same tape. A faint stain, dark and unmistakable, marred the steel. "Voila," Poirot said, holding the knife aloft. "The weapon, Jap. Hidden among the tools of the trade, where it would seem but a part of the dancer's life." Jap's eyes widened, and he took the knife, examining it under the lantern's light. "Good Lord, Poirot, you've done it. That's blood, no mistake. And the tape, it's the kind they all use, could belong to any of them. Carter, Marsh, even one of the other dancers." Poirot's smile was measured. "Oui, but it is not the ownership that matters, but the intent. This knife was chosen for its familiarity, its ability to blend into the studio. The killer knew Clara's habits, knew she would be alone. They struck with precision, then hid the blade where it would be overlooked, trusting the mirror's destruction to distract us." Jap wrapped the knife in a cloth, his excitement palpable. "We'll have this tested. Blood type, fingerprints, the lot. But who's it point to? Carter was here late. Marsh has that cut on his hand. And Finch, well, he's a dark horse, isn't he?" Poirot's gaze returned to the alcove, where the grease paint smudge on the wall caught his eye. "The grease paint, Jap. It links the knife to the mirror. Someone touched both, perhaps in haste, perhaps to stage the scene. We must consider the timing. Madame Holt heard a clatter as she left at 7. Yet Clara was alive when Evelyn departed at 8. The murder, it occurred later, near midnight, as the letter fragment suggests." Jap nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "So the killer came back, or was already here, waiting. Marsh's alibi falls apart after 9, and Finch was unaccounted for during the theatre interval. Carter's got no one to back her up after 8. Any of them could have done it." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the shelf, a rhythm as precise as a dancer's steps. "The letter, mon ami. It is the heart of this. Clara was summoned to the studio, perhaps by threat, perhaps by trust. The killer knew her movements, her solitude. But why the mirror? Why destroy it unless it held a truth too dangerous to leave intact?" They returned to the main studio, where the lantern's light cast eerie shadows across the broken mirror. Poirot knelt once more, examining the shards. A single piece, caught in the frame's edge, bore a faint scratch, not from the break, but from something dragged across its surface. "Curieux," he murmured. "This scratch, it is deliberate, like the one on the bar, a mark left to mislead, or to point us somewhere else." Jap crouched beside him, his torch illuminating the shard. "You think the killer's leaving breadcrumbs, Poirot? Trying to throw us off?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Or to tell us something, Jap. The mirror's destruction was no afterthought. It was part of the performance. The killer wanted us to see chaos, but in chaos there is order if one looks with the little grey cells." He rose, dusting his knees with his handkerchief. "We must speak again to our suspects, press them on this letter and their movements. The knife, it narrows the field, but it doesn't yet name the hand that wielded it." As they left the studio, the fog seemed to close around them, a silent accomplice to the mystery. Poirot's thoughts were a whirl of images: the hidden knife, the charred letter, the grease paint smudge. Evelyn Carter's ambition, Leonard Marsh's control, Arthur Finch's devotion. Each had a motive, each had opportunity. But the knife and the letter pointed to a deeper secret, One Clara had died to protect or expose. The truth, Poirot said softly. It's like a dancer's shadow, Jap. It moves with her, but it cannot be caught until the light is just right. We are close, mon ami. Very close. Chapter 9. The Choreographer's Confession. The evening had deepened over Covent Garden, the fog now a dense curtain that swallowed the light of the gas lamps and muffled the distant hum of London's nightlife. Hercule Poirot and Inspector Japp stood in the rehearsal hall of the Étoile Ballet Company, where the air was thick with the lingering tension of the day's discoveries. The slender knife, its blade stained with blood and wrapped in dancer's tape, lay in an evidence bag on a nearby table, its presence a silent accusation. Poirot's grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Leonard Marsh, who stood before them, his commanding presence diminished by the weight of scrutiny. Marsh, his dark hair dishevelled and his black turtleneck slightly rumpled, leaned against the bar, his arms crossed as if to shield himself from the questions to come. The cut on his hand, now scabbed but still visible, drew Poirot's attention, a small but potent detail in the tapestry of clues. The rehearsal hall was empty, the dancers dismissed for the evening, and the silence was broken only by the faint creak of the wooden floor as Japp shifted his weight, his notebook open and his expression stern. "Monsieur Marsh," Poirot began, his voice soft but laced with an edge of steel, "we have found the weapon that ended Mademoiselle Vane's life. A knife, hidden in the props room, wrapped in tape used by dancers. A tool, perhaps, that you might recognize?" He gestured to the evidence bag, his eyes never leaving Marsh's face. Marsh's gaze flicked to the knife, and for a moment his composure faltered, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "That's mine," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I use it to cut fabric for costumes, to trim scenery. It's been in the props room for weeks. Anyone could have taken it." Japp's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Anyone, Mr. Marsh, or someone who knew exactly where to find it. Someone who knew Clara's habits, who could get close without raising her guard. Your alibi's paper-thin after 9, and that cut on your hand. It's looking more like glass than a splinter to me." Marsh's jaw tightened, and he uncrossed his arms, his hands clenching at his sides. "I told you, Inspector, I was at home, working on the score. I didn't kill Clara. She was everything to me. My muse, my creation. Why would I destroy that?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "Pourquoi indeed, monsieur? But muses, they are not always obedient, no? Mademoiselle Vane, she argued with you about the new ballet, L'Ombre Éternelle. She wished to change your vision, to assert her own. And there is the matter of a letter she burned, one that spoke of a meeting at midnight, of secrets to be revealed. Did she threaten to expose something, perhaps? Something that could ruin you?" Marsh's face paled, and his eyes darted to the side, avoiding Poirot's piercing gaze. "A letter? I know nothing of any letter. Clara and I argued, yes, but it was about art, not secrets. She wanted to soften the ballet's ending, make it more hopeful. I refused. That's all." Poirot leaned forward, his voice a velvet blade. "All, monsieur? I think not. Madame Holt saw you in the alley, meeting a cloaked figure, late at night. A secret meeting, perhaps, to discuss this letter, or to plan something more. Final? And the grease paint on the mirror, the cut on your hand. These are not the marks of an innocent man." Marsh's composure cracked, his shoulders sagging as he ran a hand through his hair. "All right," he said, his voice breaking. "There was something between Clara and me. Not just art. We were involved. It was a mistake, a passion that grew out of our work. She wanted to end it, said it was clouding her focus, her career. I begged her to stay, to keep it secret. But I didn't kill her, I swear it." Japp's eyebrows shot up, and he scribbled furiously in his notebook. "An affair, eh? That's motive, Mr. Marsh. If Clara was going to spill the beans, it could have ruined your reputation, your position with the company. Maybe you met her at midnight to talk her out of it, and things got out of hand." Marsh shook his head vehemently, his eyes wild. "No, I loved her, Inspector. I was at home that night, alone. I didn't go to the studio. The knife? It's mine, yes, but I didn't use it. Someone must have taken it. Someone who wanted to frame me." Poirot's smile was faint, but probing. "Someone, monsieur, or you, in a moment of desperation. The letter fragment we found, it spoke of a meeting, a threat. If Clara wished to reveal your affair, it would have cost you dearly. And the mirror, smashed so deliberately, perhaps to hide your reflection as you struck." Marsh sank onto a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. "I couldn't. She was my everything. Yes, we argued. Yes, I was afraid she'd tell someone about us. But I'd never hurt her. You have to believe me." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind remained sharp. "Belief, monsieur, is not my currency. Evidence is. The knife, the grease paint, the cut on your hand, these speak loudly. But there is more to learn. Tell me, did you ever see Clara with this letter, or know who might have sent it?" Marsh looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Number, she never mentioned a letter, but she was distant the last few days, distracted. I thought it was the ballet, or our situation. Now I wonder if someone else knew, someone who used it against her." Japp snapped his notebook shut, his patience thinning. "We'll need more than your word, Mr. Marsh. You're coming to the station for a formal statement, and don't think about leaving town." As a constable led Marsh away, Poirot remained in the rehearsal hall, his gaze fixed on the empty bar. The confession of the affair was a significant piece of the puzzle, but it did not complete the picture. Marsh's desperation, his cut hand, his weak alibi. They pointed to guilt, yet his grief seemed genuine. Poirot thought of the letter fragment, the grease paint, the knife hidden so cleverly. "The truth," he murmured to Japp, "is a dance, mon ami. Each step reveals more, but we must follow the rhythm carefully." They stepped into the fog, the rehearsal, hall's echoes fading behind them. Poirot's mind was a whirl of images, Marsh's trembling hands, the charred letter, the mirror's shattered remains. The affair was a motive, but was it the only one? The letter suggested another player, someone who knew Clara's secret and used it to lure her to her death. As they walked toward the police station, Poirot felt the net tightening, the truth drawing closer, like a dancer poised for the final leap. Chapter 10. The Mirror's Truth. The fog over Covent Garden had thickened into a dense grey shroud as evening settled, wrapping the Étoile Ballet Company's studio in an eerie stillness. Inside, the rehearsal hall glowed faintly under the flicker of gas lamps, their light casting long shadows across the polished floor. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, fastidious figure a stark contrast to the looming presence of the suspects gathered before him: Evelyn Carter, Leonard Marsh, and Arthur Finch. The air was taut with anticipation, as if the very walls awaited the unveiling of a truth long concealed. Inspector Japp stood by the door, his arms crossed, his eyes darting between the trio, ready to act on Poirot's revelations. The broken ebony mirror, its shards still scattered near the bar, seemed to watch the scene, its jagged edges catching the lamplight like accusing eyes. Poirot's grey gaze, sharp and unyielding, moved from one suspect to another, his moustache twitching faintly as he prepared to unravel the mystery of Clara Vane's death. The knife, the letter fragment, the grease paint smudge, all had led to this moment, and Poirot felt the puzzle's pieces aligning in his mind, the little grey cells arranging them into a pattern as precise as a dancer's choreography. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding, "we are gathered here to uncover the truth behind the tragic death of Mademoiselle Clara Vane. A dancer of rare brilliance, struck down in this very studio, her life ended by a single precise stab wound, and the great ebony mirror shattered beside her. But why? Why destroy such a symbol unless it held a secret too dangerous to remain?" Evelyn Carter, her auburn hair pulled tightly back, stood with her arms crossed, her green eyes defiant but flickering with unease. Leonard Marsh, his silver-streaked hair dishevelled, leaned against the bar, the cut on his hand a silent accusation. Arthur Finch, clutching a worn Giselle program, sat hunched in a chair, his round face pale and his eyes red-rimmed with grief. Each bore the weight of suspicion, and Poirot's gaze pierced them all. "Let us begin," Poirot continued, "with the facts. Mademoiselle Vane was killed near midnight, summoned to the studio by a letter, a fragment of which we found, reading, 'Meet me at midnight, or all will be revealed.' This letter, burned by Clara, yet partially preserved, spoke of a secret worth killing for. And the knife, hidden in the props room, wrapped in dancer's tape, was the instrument of her death. But whose hand wielded it?" He turned to Evelyn, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Carter, you were Clara's rival, her understudy, always in her shadow. Your ambition burned brightly, non? You left the studio at 8, but no one can confirm your movements after. Did you return, perhaps, driven by envy, to seize the spotlight you craved?" Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and she stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I didn't kill her, Mr. Poirot. Yes, I wanted her role. Who wouldn't? But I respected Clara. I was home, alone, as I told you. I had no reason to harm her." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he moved on to Finch. "Monsieur Finch, your devotion to Clara was profound, almost an obsession. You were at the Lyceum, yes, but absent during the interval, from 8:30 to 10. Time enough to come here, to confront the woman who held your heart, but not your hand. Did she reject you, monsieur, and drive you to desperation?" Finch's hands trembled, and he shook his head vehemently. "No, no. I loved Clara, Mr. Poirot. I'd never hurt her. I was at the theatre, I swear. Ask Mrs. Langley. I only stepped out for air during the interval. I didn't come here." Poirot's gaze settled on Marsh, his voice softening to a dangerous whisper. "And you, Monsieur Marsh, the choreographer, the master of this company. You admitted to an affair with Clara, a secret she wished to end, a secret that, if revealed, would ruin your reputation, your authority. Your alibi falters after 9, and the cut on your hand, it speaks of glass, of a mirror broken by your own hand. Did you meet Clara at midnight, to silence her forever? Marsh's face crumpled, and he sank onto the bar, his voice hoarse. I loved her, Poirot. I begged her to stay, yes, but I didn't kill her. The knife was mine, but anyone could have taken it. I was at home, alone, working. I swear it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. The truth, mes amis, lies not in your words, but in the mirror. It was struck, not in a struggle, but with purpose, after Clara's death. Why? To hide a reflection, the reflection of the killer as he struck. And the grease paint, found on the mirror and in the props room, tells us who. He paused, his eyes locking onto Marsh. Monsieur Marsh, you used grease paint, did you not, to mark costumes, to sketch designs on fabric? A habit from your days as a dancer, perhaps, but one you continued. Marsh's eyes widened, but he shook his head. Grease paint? Yes, I use it sometimes, but so do others. It proves nothing. Poirot's smile was faint, but relentless. It proves much, monsieur. The knife, your knife, was hidden where only someone familiar with the props room would place it. The letter summoned Clara to the studio, threatening to expose your affair. You could not allow this, for it would end your career, your control. You met her at midnight, stabbed her with your own blade, and then shattered the mirror to suggest an accident, a struggle. But you forgot the grease paint, transferred from your hand to the glass as you struck, and the cut on your hand. From the mirror you broke. Marsh staggered back, his face ashen. No, I didn't. I couldn't. His voice broke, and he sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I loved her, Poirot. I didn't mean to. She was going to tell the company, ruin everything. I only wanted to talk, to make her see reason. But she wouldn't listen. And I lost control. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting in the lamplight. That's enough, Marsh. You're under arrest for the murder of Clara Vane. Evelyn and Finch stood frozen, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Poirot's gaze softened as he watched Marsh being led away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Love, he said quietly to Japp, is a dangerous thing when it demands possession. Monsieur Marsh sought to control Clara's heart as he did her art, and in doing so, he destroyed them both. The room fell silent, the weight of the confession settling like dust. The mirror's truth had been revealed, its broken shards a testament to a crime born of passion and betrayal. Chapter 11. The Final Bow. The fog over Covent Garden had begun to lift, revealing the faint glow of gas lamps along the cobbled streets. But within the Etoile Ballet Company's rehearsal hall, a different kind of clarity had settled. The air was heavy with the aftermath of Leonard Marsh's confession, his anguished admission still echoing in the minds of those who remained. Hercule Poirot stood near the bar, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amid the storm of emotions. The broken ebony mirror, its shards glinting in the lamplight, seemed to watch in silent judgment, its role as witness fulfilled. Inspector Japp, his face a mix of triumph and weariness, oversaw the constable leading Marsh away in handcuffs. The choreographer's head hung low, his silver-streaked hair falling across his eyes, his once commanding presence reduced to a broken man. Evelyn Carter and Arthur Finch stood apart, their expressions a study in contrasts. Evelyn's sharp features softened by a flicker of relief, her green eyes no longer defiant but subdued. Finch clutching his worn Giselle program, his round face etched with sorrow, as if the loss of Clara had been compounded by the betrayal of her mentor. Poirot's grey eyes, sharp and reflective, moved from the suspects to the mirror's remains. The truth had been uncovered, yet the weight of it lingered, a reminder of the human passions that had led to such a tragic end. He adjusted his Homburg, his moustache twitching faintly as he addressed Japp, who was scribbling final notes in his battered notebook. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant in the quiet hall. "The case is closed, but the heart, it does not so easily find resolution. Monsieur Marsh, he loved Mademoiselle Vane, but his love was a cage demanding her submission. When she sought to break free, to reveal their secret, he could not bear it. The knife, the mirror, the letter, they were the props of his desperation, staged to conceal his crime." Japp nodded, tucking his notebook away. "A nasty business, Poirot. That knife, hidden so cleverly, and the grease paint on the mirror. It was you who saw what we missed. But I'll admit, I thought Carter might have done it, with her ambition and all. Or even Finch, with his puppy dog eyes." Poirot's smile was faint, almost melancholy. "Ambition and devotion, they are powerful forces, Japp, but they lacked the precision of Marsh's motive. Mademoiselle Carter, she envied Clara, yes, but her heart was not consumed by it. Monsieur Finch, his love was pure, if obsessive, but he lacked the courage or the cruelty to act. Marsh, however, had both motive and opportunity, and the mirror, it betrayed him. Its reflection would have shown his face as he struck, and so he shattered it, hoping to shatter the truth." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "Mr. Poirot, I didn't like Clara sometimes, but I never wanted this. She was brilliant, and I thought I'd dance in her shadow forever. Now—" Her voice faltered, and she looked away, her hands clenching the silk scarf she still held. Finch, his eyes glistening, spoke next, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was an angel, Mr. Poirot. I only wanted to see her shine. Marsh. How could he do it? How could he take her from us?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. "Love, monsieur, when it becomes possession, can turn to poison. Clara danced for freedom, for her art, but Marsh wished to bind her to his vision, to his heart. When she refused, his passion became her end." Japp clapped a hand on Poirot's shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "You've done it again, Poirot. We'll have Marsh at the station, and the evidence, knife, grease paint, that letter fragment. It'll hold up in court. But I'll be glad to see the back of this place. Too many shadows for my liking." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes drifting to the mirror's shards. "Shadows, Japp, are where the truth hides. But they cannot withstand the light of reason. Let us leave this stage to its ghosts." As the constable escorted Evelyn and Finch out, their footsteps echoing in the empty hall, Poirot lingered a moment longer. He knelt beside the mirror's frame, picking up a single shard with his handkerchief. The grease paint smudge, faint but damning, was a testament to Marsh's mistake, a moment of carelessness in an otherwise meticulous crime. Poirot placed the shard back, his thoughts turning to Clara, her grace frozen forever in death, her final performance a tragedy not of the stage, but of the heart. He rose, dusting his knees with a fastidious flick, and followed Japp into the fog-shrouded night. The truth had been revealed, the killer unmasked, but the cost was a star extinguished too soon. As they walked toward the police station, Poirot's mind was already turning to the next mystery, for in the world of Hercule Poirot, the truth was a dance that never truly ended. Chapter 12. The curtain falls. The fog of Covent Garden had at last begun to dissipate, leaving the streets of London bathed in the soft amber glow of her gas lamps as night fully claimed the city. Hercule Poirot walked alone from the Étoile Ballet Company's studio, his polished shoes clicking softly on the damp cobblestones, his overcoat buttoned against the lingering chill. The weight of Clara Vane's murder, now resolved, rested heavily upon his shoulders, not as a burden of failure, but as a reminder of the fragile threads that wove human hearts together. His grey eyes, ever watchful, reflected the faint light, but his thoughts were inward, tracing the intricate steps of the tragedy that had unfolded. The studio, now silent, was behind him, its broken ebony mirror a mute witness to the crime and its unravelling. Leonard Marsh's confession, the discovery of the knife, the charred letter fragment, all had converged to reveal a truth as sharp and piercing as the blade that had ended Clara's life. Yet Poirot, with his fastidious nature and unyielding pursuit of order, felt a quiet sorrow for the dancer whose brilliance had been extinguished by a love turned to possession. As he passed the darkened theatres of Covent Garden, their marquees dimmed for the night, Poirot's mind replayed the final moments of the case. Marsh, broken and weeping, had admitted his crime, a desperate act born of fear that Clara would expose their affair, shattering his reputation and control over the Étoile Ballet Company. The knife, hidden among the props, had been his, its tape-wrapped handle a familiar tool of the studio. The grease paint smudge on the mirror, a careless trace from his hand, had betrayed him, as had the cut on his palm, earned not from a splinter, but from the mirror he shattered to stage an accident. The letter, with its ominous demand for a midnight meeting, had been his final ploy to silence Clara, a plea that turned to murder when she refused to yield. Poirot paused at a corner, his gaze lifting to the starry sky, now visible through the thinning mist. "The stage," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "is a place of illusion, where beauty masks the truth. But the truth, it always finds its way to the light, like a dancer stepping from the shadows." Clara had danced for freedom, her art a defiance of the constraints Marsh sought to impose. Her death, though tragic, had been a final act of defiance, for in dying she had set the stage for her killer's unmasking. He thought of Evelyn Carter, her ambition tempered by the realization that her rival's death brought no victory, only loss. Arthur Finch, his devotion pure but unrequited, would carry Clara's memory like a wound, his Giselle program a relic of a love that could never be. And Mrs. Holt, the seamstress, whose quiet observations had woven the threads of evidence together. Her sharp eyes had seen the fear in Clara's face, the letter she burned, the clatter in the night. Each had played their part, but it was Poirot's little grey cells arranging the chaos into order that had brought the curtain down. As he reached the end of Floral Street, the distant sound of a violin drifted from an open window, a mournful note that seemed to echo Clara's final performance. Poirot adjusted his Homburg, his moustache curving in a wistful smile. "Mademoiselle Vane," he said softly, "your dance is ended, but its echo remains. Hercule Poirot salutes you." He turned toward his lodgings, the fog now little more than a memory, the stars above a reminder that even in darkness light persisted. The case of the Ebony Mirror was closed, but the world, with its endless mysteries, awaited. Poirot walked on, his steps precise, his mind already turning to the next puzzle. For in the dance of truth and deception, Hercule Poirot was always ready for the next act.